All right, everyone, we are back. And today I am going to be reviewing a video by Sacred Candor on the moral argument. So there's a few things I should say. I had started the stream earlier, but had some technical issues, so I'm restarting. So I'll try to say some of the same things and be more concise this time. Okay, so the first few things to say are, I have a TikTok. I'm on TikTok, so go over there and check that out. I'm trying to hit 1,000 followers on there so that I can start doing live streams on there, and they'll be sent back over to YouTube. So I'm not going to be, just on TikTok. I'm going to be on both of them, and that's a good platform for doing live streams because you could bring people up on stage and talk to them, and it's a good way to do feedback and interaction and like talk to pretty large numbers of people. So if you've seen Phil talk, Danny tends to talk to people about religion, but I'd like to talk to people about meta ethics and topics and philosophy more generally. So boom, you got that. So check out the TikTok. I am going to be updating and revising other stuff, but I do have a blog, so check that out. I was, on a hiatus from the blog for a month or two, but that's back and I'll be posting there more regularly. And I have been for a few weeks now. So check out the blog, also called Lance Independent. And also I'm on Discord. I have a server on Discord, so you're welcome to join that server. We try to keep things civil and mostly serious there. I'm not anti-fun, but, feel free to check that out. And that's a good place to go if you want resources, information, if you want to ask me questions, if you want to look for debates, if you're looking for getting involved in discussion. So all of that stuff. Okay. So that's a few things. So people should be coming back in. Actually, quite a few people here before, the technical issues. So what had happened is I was on Firefox. I tried sharing the screen. The audio wasn't coming through. So I guess we should just check if the audio is going to come through on this video. So are there any more announcements that I want to make? Yeah. So I got the blog going. Check out TikTok. Oh, right. So my discussion with David Enoch was mentioned on the Lighter Report blog. It's a big blog in the academic philosophy world. So that was really exciting. It's getting a lot of views. So that's pretty cool to get mentioned somewhere like that. Okay, 1 second. I have two browsers going and I have stuff happening in both of them now that I'm like forced to use Chrome. So I'm back in Chrome. So we will see for a take two whether it's going to work. So let's just figure it out now, because I'm going to have to end the stream if Chrome also refuses to work. So let's share the screen. And if that's all working and everything's good, then I'll go back and I'll talk about the moral argument a little bit, and then we'll get started. Okay, share screen. And let's see how this goes. All right, so the screen is shared. Now, please work. Let me know if there's audio for this.
Imagine if skeptics always use a common argument against the existence of God, but every time they used it, it was actually evidence for the existence of God. I believe that the moral argument works just like that, and we're going to be talking about that today. Welcome back.
Okay, great. So it was just a Firefox problem. So I'll stop sharing that for now. And okay, so great. So people are rolling back in. Awesome, awesome, awesome. The name of the blog is the same name as this channel. It's just Lance Independent. So Lance Independent. And you can find it at lanceindependent.com. So I'm trying to stick with stuff being consistent. Like the name of my server is Lance Independent. The name of the channel, Lance Independent. The name of my blog, Lance Independent. It's all the same stuff, all the same logo. Trying to keep that consistency so I'm easy to find. So you have that. Yeah, I know StreamYard prefers Chrome, but I prefer Firefox. So I'm a little picky with customizing things, and Firefox gives me quite a bit more flexibility. So I just prefer Firefox for that reason. But if this is, so every time Firefox updates, there's been a few times where I suddenly get issues with StreamYard. So that's just the way it is. So yeah, everything prefers Chrome. That's true. So sorry, for people that are not seeing this, there's people in the comments like saying everything prefers Chrome. I agree, everything prefers Chrome. I do not prefer Chrome. I think it stands independently bad. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be reviewing this video. So a few things I mentioned before. I listened to about a third of the video. I thought there was a lot of stuff to criticize, like a lot of stuff I disagreed with. I also person that made this video. So the channel's called Sacred Candor. And so if they want to reach out and have a discussion with me, they're welcome to do that. So this is an open invitation for a discussion. It does not have to be a debate. I'm happy to do debates. Well, I shouldn't say I'm happy to do debates. I should say I am willing to do debates, especially if they're unstructured. I don't like structured debates. But I'm really just interested in having a discussion. So big motivation for me isn't simply the dispute about moral realism and anti-realism. As people that are returning viewers already know, I'm a moral anti-realist. But a big issue for me has been pushing against the idea that there's something evil or bad or terrible or awful or undesirable about moral anti-realism. So you sometimes see people say, I want moral realism to be true, or I hope moral realism is true, as if things are somehow better if that's the case. And, I just don't think that that's the case. And I feel like a lot of people that critique moral anti-realism employ rhetoric, or they frame it in ways that misrepresent what the position commits one to in a way that makes the position look bad. And that bothers me. And so a big part of my goal is to defend you could say the reputation of anti-realism as a view that does not commit you to being an evil fire-breathing monster from the pits of hell. I just don't think that anti-realism entails anything like that. But you'll see people say things like, if you were really a moral anti-realist, you would be a psychopath. And, I don't take that as a serious philosophical position. It's ridiculous. So you'll see these kinds of claims. You also see people say stuff like, people don't act like moral anti-realists. Now, just compare to food. Do people act like gastronomic realists? Do they act like food is intrinsically good or bad? Well, people prefer some food over other food. People argue about whether pineapple on pizza is good or bad. People enjoy their food. They have judgments and attitudes about what food to enjoy. They must think the food is intrinsically good. That's the only way you could think it's good, right? No, you could have subjective preferences. You could eat food and go, that tastes good to me. And if someone goes, well, it tastes nasty to me, you would go, false, incorrect. You're not going to, pull a Dwight from The Office on them and just go, false. You recognize you have some types of reactions. Other people have different reactions. And, if you talk about your reactions and they talk about their reactions, you're not necessarily saying anybody's right or wrong. We don't do this for food. Why would we do this for morality? Now, there is this difference, and the difference is that our food preferences usually are about ourselves. It's about our own conduct and not about other people's conduct. And moral attitudes often are about other people's conduct. But that's just a difference in scope. It's a difference of, with a food preference, I have a preference for what I eat. I don't have a preference for what you eat. I don't prefer that you eat the same things I do. I mean, up to a point. It would be really sad if nobody liked the same. Like, imagine if you love pineapple on pizza and everyone else hates it. Then you're not going to be able to get it in a restaurant. So, but that just affects you. So that doesn't really show that it's other affecting. But you could genuinely have a preference about what the kind of music or food other people eat or listen to or enjoy or whatever. But generally speaking, I don't, and I don't think most people tend to. But moral standards and attitudes often are attitudes or preferences about other people's conduct. But there's nothing intrinsically realist about that. You could just have attitudes about how you want other people to act. You just can, as an anti-realist. And there's no inconsistency. There's no logical problem. You could just say, I prefer nobody steal. But a lot of people that criticize anti-realism will frame it as though if you're an anti-realist and you're against stealing, but someone else is in favor of stealing, like, you have to be okay with them being in favor of stealing. That's ridiculous. It's not an implication. Anyway, I don't want to get too far down that path. So let's look at the comments, say hi to everybody. I know I said hi to everybody before. If you're not saying it again, I apologize. Maybe you're listening now. But let's come back to that, and then we'll get into the video. All right. Just a bunch of people talking about browsers now. We'll start the browser wars. All right. So Leo's saying, like the video, peeps. Come on now, show Lance some love. I endorse that. Yeah. So like the video, subscribe, do all those things. I should say, for people that haven't seen my I think it was the last video or two, I did hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'm already up like 1,040 or something like that. So that seems to be going well. I should actually address the pineapple on pizza thing. I actually enjoy the debate. So it's become this kind of a goofy thing where people will say it just to signal. I don't know what people are trying to signal, because it's like, people might say it's cringe because people say it so many times. But I actually really like the sweet and savory combination. I think a lot of people that have an aversion to sweet stuff with savory stuff, maybe like for some people, they just don't like it. They've tried it, they don't like it. But I think sometimes people got to try stuff that they haven't tried before. And I think the sweet savory combo is one of those. I like pineapple on pizza. I think it's great. So I don't know what people's problem with it is. Maybe are people getting the like nasty canned pineapple that's just really gross? Got to put some fresh pineapple on there. Oh, right. Oh, right. The other thing I should say is I don't have guests today, and because I mentioned this before, I might bring people up onto the channel later. Maybe, we'll see. But mostly, just since this is more interactive today, I can totally pause and talk to people if you have questions or comments. I'm actually going to take a quick break, and then I'll be right back with the video. So it's just going to be a minute or two. So I'll be right back. All right, let's get things started. Let me share the screen, and we will start this video from the beginning. I may be pausing and commenting quite a lot, so I might even have to do a part 2 on this. So I don't know if I mentioned I watched about a third of this. I thought there's lots of stuff to respond to, and we'll just see. Some of it may be repetitive, some of it may be new. Let's just get started and see. Okay, and then I'll just do a quick, I'll run like a couple seconds of it just to make sure the sound is still working and everything's fine, because we just had an issue.
Imagine if skeptics always use a common argument against the existence.
Now, does that sound fine? And if it does, we will continue, because I don't want to get rolling and then have to adjust the volume or fix something later. I'll just wait for confirmation that everything is sounding good, and then we will keep going. Still haven't got it. Okay, sounds good. All right. So I will just pause this at the relevant parts. 1 second. I actually do have to slightly adjust my own audio. There we go.
Of God, but every time they used it, it was actually
start from the beginning. All right.
Imagine if skeptics always use a common argument against the existence of God, but every time they used it, it was actually evidence for the existence of God. I believe that the moral argument works just like that, and we're going to be talking about that today. Welcome back to the Sacred Candor podcast. So today we're going to be talking about the moral argument, or does morality come from God? And we're going to be discussing some material.
Okay, someone said it's a little loud. Does that sound a little better?
That is actually found in Frank Turek and Norman Geisler's book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I will leave a link of that to that book down in the description below. In their book, they have an entire chapter dedicated to the moral law, or to the moral argument, I should say. And it's called, I believe it's called Hitler versus Mother Teresa, or Mother Teresa versus Hitler. Their chapter on the moral argument is so good, and it has so much content in there. And so we're going to be taking a look at what I believe Norman Geisler, not Frank Turek, I believe Norman Geisler specifically wrote this chapter. Throughout the chapter, he gives a story, and he says, Norman, was going through such and such. That makes it pretty clear that Norman wrote that chapter. So we're going to be discussing that. And ultimately, the idea, or the question, does morality come from God? I believe it's inevitable. So we're going to go through 8 reasons why it's inevitable. I believe that if just one moral obligation or one moral law exists, then God exists, because a moral law, any law, requires a moral lawgiver.
So that's a common phrase that you'll hear from some Christian apologists. Other people may say this too, that moral laws have to come from a lawgiver. Now, it's important to notice that in academic philosophy, so I'll just say a few things to sort of preempt some of the stuff that I might say later. The majority of analysts Hill paper survey are atheists. Now, I should say, don't put too much stock. I don't. But don't put too much stock in what the majority of academic philosophers think. A big reason why is that there are big selection effects. There are various demographic and sociological factors that would cause people to pursue careers in academic philosophy, specifically through the types of institutions like the university system, and end up publishing and doing work in those areas that might be driven by like there might be factors why people that are predisposed towards atheism would go into those fields. And so it's not representative people if you like randomly selected people and had them become philosophers. So the fact that most philosophers are atheists, that doesn't necessarily mean the arguments against theism or in favor of atheism must be wonderful and that they're all atheists because the arguments are so good. It could just be people that are disposed towards atheism are more likely to become philosophers for a variety of complicated reasons. Now, that being said, so the majority of them, are atheists, and it's also the case that a majority of them are moral realists. And the way that philosophers, whether they're moral naturalists and they think that moral facts are at least consistent with or reducible to certain types of facts that are constituted by the natural sciences, like it's within the scope of the natural sciences. The naturalist accounts, they're very unlikely to think that you really are going to need God or some kind of lawgiver to have moral facts. But even non-naturalists tend to be like that. Non-naturalist moral realists tend to be atheists or, secular, or at the very least, they don't have this view that you require God for there to be these stance-independent moral facts. But notice that term law. Keep that in mind, because the way that academic philosophers typically talk about the topic, they'll talk about moral truth or moral facts, moral properties. They tend to use certain kinds of technical terms. Fact, truth, property, that doesn't have that connotation of there being this social element to it. When you think of law, you think, I don't see an issue with saying, yeah, typically the notion that there are laws has this connotation that, well, someone issued the law. There's something kind of agentic behind that terminology. And so saying, hey, laws require a lawgiver, that can sound really intuitively appealing. But think about like a scientific law. Well, there's a like scientific laws. Do they require a lawgiver? So the moment you shift over to that notion of a scientific law, we think of laws more in terms of there being some sort of objective facts, that there's some sort of hard fact about what the world is like. And that fact, it's once you use law in those terms, it's not clear that that conception or characterization of law presupposes a lawgiver. So I think when Christian apologists that employ this notion of laws require a lawgiver, they're playing on that other sense of law, that sense of law more in the social sense, not the type of like laws of nature type thing. But even there, I think people could try to play on the connotations of the language. But this is a big point for me. That connotation and implication underlies a lot of the way that people frame philosophical discussions in ways that can push people towards seeing one view or another view as more plausible for reasons related to the sort of colloquial connotations and implications associated with words, the way we feel about those words in their ordinary usages, even though when we're talking philosophy, it would be best if we used terms in a technical sense, or we simply used alternative terms entirely that were sort of abstracted away from those connotations, so that we didn't get the sense, well, yeah, law's got to come from a lawgiver. Because if I say facts got to come from a fact giver, that's going to sound really silly. Why would facts have to come from a fact? There could just be facts, right? And so my point here is that secular moral realists are going to frame things in terms of truths or facts. And I don't think people would have that knee-jerk reaction of, yeah, facts got to have a fact giver, truth's got to have a truth giver. But you might kind of have that feeling, yeah, a law, it makes sense to say that laws have a lawgiver. And so I already think that the choice of moral law is exploiting that connotative side of things to give an edge rhetorically to the moral argument and this idea that you need God for there to be moral facts, or in this case, moral laws.
In the book, they outline the argument in this way. So premise 1 is every law has a lawgiver. Premise 2 is there is a moral law. Premise 3, therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. Does morality come from God? Well,
right. So, someone that is a secular moral realist, if they're going to use that terminology of there are moral laws, they would just reject the notion that if there's a law, there's got to be a lawgiver. They could just reject that. That's not a difficult thing to do. So here I'm playing a little bit of defense for a secular moral realist, but I think justifiably so.
Depends if morality exists. And that is why relativists, skeptics, atheists, many of them are moral relativists. Why? Because ever since Christians have been using this argument, they have thought that maybe by proving, if we can find out that morality is actually not real and it's all relative.
Wow. Okay. Lots of stuff to go over there. So, let's just roll it back a little bit.
Giver. Does morality come from God? Well, it depends if morality exists. And that is why relativists, skeptics, atheists.
So you already have that phrase, it depends if morality exists. So I really have an issue with people talking about like framing realism as the view that morality exists and anti-realist views, like relativism, as the view that morality doesn't exist. Moral relativists do not think that morality doesn't exist. They think that morality is relative. That's not the view that it doesn't exist. If you think that taste is relative, taste in food, does that mean you think food doesn't exist? Does that mean you think food experiences don't exist? Does that mean you think the culinary arts just don't exist? There's no such thing as tasty food or gross food. It doesn't exist. No, that's ridiculous. Being a relativist about something is a stance towards the nature of evaluative and normative claims with respect to that particular domain. It is the view that when often there's a semantic thesis and we could characterize it in those terms. I don't like that, but that's how it typically is. When a person says, this chocolate cake is delicious, that just means I find this chocolate cake to be delicious. There's an implicit indexical element. That does not mean that the person does not think deliciousness exists. They think deliciousness is relational. It's a fact about the relation between a person's subjective preferences and their experiences of the food. It is not the view that taste experiences don't exist. Same thing for morality. A moral relativist doesn't think morality isn't real. They think morality is relative. That's why they're called a relativist and not a morality isn't realist. Now, you might say, okay, but it's a type of anti-realism. Surely anti-realism, it's right in the name. If you're an anti-realist, you're against it being real. It's anti-real. It's not real. I didn't pick the name. Philosophers pick the name. It's a bad name. The problem is the label, the name. Just because that's the label doesn't mean that you just read off the crudest, like goofiest, like, well, it's the etymology of the word, so it must mean that. That's not how concepts work. They're not just whatever the crudest possible interpretation of the etymology of some prefix is. Therefore, you know how the word is in fact used by people in a given domain of discourse. That would be ridiculous. And yet people do this all the time. I even see professional philosophers say anti-realism is like, they'll talk about does morality exist or not. They should know better. That's ambiguous. It's ambiguous. Exist in what respect? Like, okay, I'm an anti-realist. I'm not even a relativist. My view, you might say, is closest to non-cognitivists or error theorists. Maybe it doesn't fall into any of these categories, but it's closer to them than relativism. Okay, so do I think morality doesn't exist? Well, what is it that you're saying doesn't exist? I think moral judgments exist, moral behavior exists, moral attitudes exist. I have moral preferences and values. I think you probably have them. So what is it that I'm saying doesn't exist? I'm saying objective moral facts don't exist. So why not say that? Why say I don't think morality exists? I think that the realist conception of morality is a bad conception of morality. It's mistaken. So I don't think that the things that they think exist do exist. And I think that their conception of morality is a bad one. I think that there are better construals of what morality is that are consistent with anti-realism, which is simply the denial of the realist conception. So I'm not saying morality doesn't exist. I'm saying morality doesn't involve stance-independent moral facts. Those are just two different claims. Totally exists. So anyway, I just get real animated with that. Okay, let's see.
Many of them are moral relativists.
So that's an interesting claim. Many of them are moral relativists. Are they? What's the data on that? That might be true. If you look at like the Pulzer and Wright 2020 survey, anti-realist pluralism, you will see that about 75% of the participants in that study, and that drew on two populations. It drew on college students that were surveyed in the US, and it drew on Amazon's Mechanical Turk. It's an online survey platform. I don't know if they explicitly specify in that paper whether they drew on participants from the United States, but I think that they did. So it's two populations from the United States. So what they found is that across, I think, 7 different measures, that participants favored anti-realist response options about 3/4 of the time. It was pretty consistent. Now, the thing with that is that the most common responses were some type of individual subjectivism, type of relativism, or cultural relativism, also a type of relativism. So relativism was the most common stance in that particular pair of populations that were sampled. They give relativist responses. It doesn't mean that they are relativists. A lot of people, if you ask them what they mean by those terms and concepts, they won't characterize it in the same way that academic philosophers do. So I'm not convinced most people are relativist or most atheists are relativist, but maybe they are. So also, there have been other studies that find atheism or agnosticism and giving anti-realist responses. So that population, I'm just saying that 3/4 of the participants gave the anti-realist responses, with most of them choosing relativist responses. That's not even controlling for whether they were atheists or not, just looking at the atheists. That number is going to be higher. So it could be that most atheists in the United States, if asked, would give relativist sounding responses to questions about metaethics. I think that's a plausible claim. So that could be true. Doesn't mean they're actually relativists, though.
Why? Because ever since Christians have been using this argument.
Now ever since Christians have been using this argument. That's a strange claim. The implication there seems to be that the metaethical positions expressed or adopted by atheists is somehow reactive to the moral argument, or like what Christians are saying. I don't think so. They probably held these views for a long time. I mean, maybe if you look at the whole sociology of, let's say, American atheism or something like that, what atheists say is in a way reactive to what Christians have said historically. That actually might be plausible too. But the way this could be worded a little, I think, more carefully. I don't know that the way that atheists think about metaethics or morality more generally is that responsive to what Christians or Christian apologists say. I don't know.
They have thought that maybe by proving, if we can find out that morality is actually not real and is all relative,
see that? It's not real and is all relative. Weird, right? Those are separate claims. If you think it's all relative, that does not mean you think it's not real. So you'll notice that people will conflate it's relative with it's not real. Those are not the same things.
Objective.
I mean, motion is relative. Do we think motion's not real? But like, relative does not mean not real. It means it typically will mean something like not objective, but relativism isn't even inconsistent with realism. So look, relativism in metaethics is simply the view that moral claims, the semantics of moral claims, can be analyzed or is best analyzed in terms of there being an implicit indexical element to those claims, such that they are true or false relative to some standard. And that will typically be the standards of individuals or cultures. It could be relativized to something else. Now, individuals and cultures, you could say, have stances. And so the typical types of relativism are going to hold that moral claims are stance independently true. Stance dependently true. So they're a type of anti-realist cognitivism. So moral claims can be true or false, and they're made true or false by the stances of individuals or groups. So there are moral facts on this view. Morality is real. There are moral facts for relativists. But you could relativize moral claims to something other than stances, in which case you'd have both realism and relativism. Relativism is a view about indexicalization. It's not a view about stance independence necessarily. You can have views that are stance dependent, but not relativist. Here's one example: ideal observer theory. You could hold the view that moral claims are like, whether a moral claim is true or false depends on whether it is what a fully informed, ideally rational agent would endorse. And you could hold the view that a fully informed, ideally rational agent would have the same moral standard. Like there's one correct standard. Now, if there's one correct standard, it's the standard of this like hyper rational agent, right? Now, whenever people make moral claims, they're either true or they're false. They're not true or false relative to the attitudes or preferences of that person or anybody else. Now, you could say they're all relative to the one being, but notice that that wouldn't allow for an indexing of the statements. So by indexing, I mean, if I say I'm Lance, that statement's true. If you say you're not Lance, the statement's false. The truth value of the statement is can vary according to who it is indexed to. And things can be indexed in different ways, but the truth status of the propositional claims can vary depending on how they're indexed. Now, if you're an ideal observer theory, there's no indexing, so there's no relativism. Now, there's it's a sort of supplemental section. I think it's been removed in newer versions of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but it's a wonderful section. It was this extra supplement that accompanied some of the articles on there that was written by Richard Joyce, who's a prominent error theorist. It's a type of moral anti-realism. And in there, Joyce refers to a couple older papers that call these sorts of accounts, like ideal observer theory, as relation designating accounts. So I don't need to try to get into the etymology, and I don't even know. I took a look at the papers, but I don't recall what they're saying. But roughly what those relation designating accounts do is they allow for moral facts to be stance dependent, but non-relative. So relativism versus non-relativism and stance dependence versus stance independence are technically orthogonal distinctions. This is not commonly appreciated even by academic philosophers, but it's certainly not appreciated in a lot of the public discourse on this topic. It causes an enormous amount of confusion. Relativism does not entail anti-realism. I will say I've never heard of a relativist who isn't also an anti-realist in the like characterizations of realism. I've never heard of someone that is a relativist that relativizes things to something other than stances, but it's logically possible. So you could also have, well, I'm not going to get into all the intricacies here, but the bottom line is, to make this straightforward, it's really ambiguous to say that if you're a relativist, you think morality isn't real. Someone could say, look, by real, I just mean objective or stance independent. But I don't think that's a good way to frame things. It's confusing. It's misleading. And why say that when you could just say relativists tend not to think that there are stance independent moral facts? Just use the technical terms because that makes things clear and unambiguous. Just do that.
It depends on people's opinions only, and there is no real moral law above everyone, whether or not people agree on it. So if morality exists, there is a moral law, and if there is a moral law, you need a moral lawgiver, because every law has a lawgiver. So therefore, relativists try to destroy morality. They try to get rid of morality so that they can say,
notice that phrasing. They try to destroy morality. They try to get rid of morality. Now, I'm an anti-realist. I hold views similar to relativist error theorists and non-cognitivists. I don't think there's objective moral facts. Am I trying to destroy morality? Okay, well, I'm a gastronomic anti-realist. Am I trying to destroy the culinary arts? Do you see me like saying like we have to stop Gordon Ramsay, like no more cheeseburgers? Well, maybe, but that wouldn't be for gastronomic reasons. There might be nutritional or ethical reasons for opposing certain kinds of food and food production. That's a totally separate issue. But I am not against people enjoying a glass of wine. I'm not going to say like, down with the Malbecs. Like that would be ridiculous. So if you're an anti-realist about some normative or evaluative domain, it does not mean you're against the domain and you're trying to destroy it. It would be absurd because probably most people in the chat, you're probably not realist about gastronomy, right? You don't think there's like some foods are intrinsically tasty. And like if you eat chocolate and you go like, I don't actually like the flavor, that you could be incorrect about that. You ought to eat it independent of how it tastes to you. Probably most of you don't think that. Does that mean you're trying to destroy gastronomy and the culinary arts? I very much doubt it. I mean, you could be trying to destroy those things, but it wouldn't be because you're a relativist about them, if you are a relativist.
That God doesn't exist. Because if morality doesn't exist, then you don't need God. So here's an example of all of this, just to kind of summarize
that is a concern. If there is this practical element here, if I don't need God, apologists, if they present that like, hey, God is the solution to a problem. Oh yeah, what problem? So if they can't threaten you with hellfire, they could at least say God is the standard of objective moral right and wrong. And so you really got to have God in order to, like, you have to believe in God in order to really have a consistent view about what that standard is that would allow you to endorse that standard. So, there's something that's supposed to be at stake here. And I think it's when you have a view, not simply about what's true, but you're trying to get people to endorse a particular view. If a contrary philosophical position would undercut some of the motivations for people caring about that view, that can pose not simply a philosophical problem, but a practical problem. And I think that Christians may struggle with this. If our philosophical arguments allow us to systematically diffuse all the reasons why it would be practically important to be a Christian, then the appeal of Christianity, if Christians say it's true, but it doesn't matter if you believe in it, or it's true, but you have no motivation, there's no motivating reason to believe it, that can undercut the goal of convincing people to endorse a view. And that could be a problem. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being concerned with that being a problem, but I do think there's something interesting about the fact that I think on some level, people are aware that, and rightly so, that practical considerations matter in how we adjudicate different positions.
3 premises. Premise 1, every law has a lawgiver. Premise 2, there is a moral law. Premise 3, therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. So here's an example to sort of explain this. If moral obligations exist, there must be someone to be obligated to. There can be no legislation without a legislator. So that's...
Yeah, see, notice the language here. Like, there can be no legislation without a legislator. It's the same thing as before. It's the kind of language where legislation is the kind of thing we typically think of as like part of our social institution. So when you imagine legislation, you imagine like politicians sitting down and policymakers coming up with things. And so the idea of like legislation without a legislator does seem a little weird. But if you just think of like, there is an irreducibly normative fact, whatever that would be, it's not obvious to me that requires people to issue it. In fact, kind of the point, part of the point is that you don't really need anybody's standards or approval for it to be a fact. There's things that's good or bad for you to do. There's things that's right or wrong for you to do. So I think part of what is at issue here is that theistic conceptions of morality may be at a very foundational level, conceptually very different from secular views.
That's why if one moral law exists, one moral obligation, then that ultimately means that there is someone to be obligated to. And if it's this cosmic reality or this cosmic entity, morality, if it exists, then you're obligated to whoever gave that cosmic moral law. What is meant by the existence of a moral law is that everyone has a fundamental sense of right and wrong. For example,
so that's strange. Let me look exactly at that claim.
That cosmic moral law. What is meant by the existence of a moral law is that everyone has a fundamental sense of right and wrong. For example,
so that doesn't seem to me to follow. So if there are these moral laws and like God has issued these moral laws, it doesn't seem logically entail that people have a sense of them. That's like a psychological claim. So it could be that there are these moral laws, but we don't have a sense of them. Maybe we have to learn about them. Maybe you can only acquire knowledge of them via scripture or prayer or revelation or something like that. I don't think but he says that it means that. I want to look at the exact claim again.
Obligated to whoever gave that cosmic moral law. What is meant by the existence
so what is meant
of a moral law is that
by the existence of a moral
everyone
law
has a fundamental sense.
Is that everyone has a fundamental sense. I don't know what work fundamental is doing there either.
Of right and wrong.
Of right and wrong. Yeah, so I don't think that that's true. It doesn't follow that if there's moral law that people have a sense of the moral law. Those are just separate claims. Now, it could be that you couldn't have a sense of the moral law unless there was a moral law to have a sense of. That's fine. It could be that the latter claim depends on the former claim being true, but it doesn't mean that the former claim entails or is equivalent to the latter claim. Now, I also wouldn't say if someone says X means Y, that they are saying X and Y are synonyms. You could say X means Y, and you just mean like X entails Y, or it's a consequence of it. It doesn't have to mean some sort of like that they are synonyms of one another. So, but even so, I still think that a mistake is being made. I think it's a little bit of a just maybe being imprecise about the language. I don't necessarily think like a genuine philosophical mistake is being made here. Maybe the language could just be clarified or cleaned up a bit. So, hey, if there's a moral law, from a Christian perspective, there would be this moral law, and there's some scriptural basis for thinking that people have some type of access to this law. But those seem conceptually independent of one another.
For example,
Well, sorry, I should say the latter isn't conceptually entailed by the former, even if the latter is dependent on the former.
everyone knows that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Everyone knows that courage is better than cowardice. All people know that love is better than hate.
So there's a few issues with that. Like everyone knows this, everyone believes this, you know, that those sorts of claims. You see these a lot from people. Now notice it's like everybody knows such and such is wrong, but the term wrong is just a normative term. That term is consistent with realism and anti-realism. You know, swap it over again to gastronomy. And if I said that food is bad or you shouldn't eat that, does that require me to think in distinctively realist terms? No. We already use normative and evaluative language like should and shouldn't, good and bad, in contexts where I don't think on reflection many of us would be inclined to endorse realism about that domain. We talk about good and bad music, good and bad movies. Do we have to be realists, or are we implicit realists about these domains? Probably not. And so when you use that language of wrong, you're not disambiguating the meta-ethical part, stance independently wrong, from the normative part, wrong. And this gives the impression, as I've spoken about many times, that if you're an anti-realist, you don't think things are wrong in any way, not even an anti-realist way, not simply that you don't think their stance independently wrong. And that is a misleading way of characterizing the anti-realist view. It gives the impression that anti-realists don't have normative moral standards. And that is not an implication of anti-realism. I mean, relativists, it's not the case that if you're a relativist, you don't have moral standards. You do have moral standards. They are relativized.
What this ultimately means is that even if you believe that morality is relative, you behave and you act as if morality is objective.
There you go. This is one of the most common things people say, and it's just not true. So even if you think morality is relative, you act as if it's objective. Okay, so again, with the food comparison, when I go to a restaurant, I sit down at the restaurant, I have a menu, and I'm deciding what food to eat. And there's food I don't like the taste of and food that I dislike the taste of. All else being equal, what am I going to do? I'm going to choose control price, ethical considerations, diet, like nutritional considerations, set aside all of that. I'm just trying to decide which meal I want to eat for like just gustatory pleasure. I'm going to choose a food that tastes good. Now, does that action imply that I think the food is objectively good? No, because we can explain my decision simply by appealing to my subjective preferences. We could do the same thing for morality. If a person goes out and they see, they're stuck with a moral dilemma, right? So they're given the trolley problem. Like they come across and it might hit 5 people and they could pull the switch and it will be redirected on an off ramp and hit one person instead. And they pull the switch. And you say, what are you doing? They're like, I'm doing what I think is the right thing. It's better to let one person die than to let 5 people die. I don't want anybody to die, but I have no choice in the matter given my, given the circumstances. Now, does that require that the person think that moral decision that they made was objectively correct? No. There are other explanations. You could say, why did you do that? They could say, well, I would prefer fewer people die. Or they could say, I felt empathy for all of the people, but the circumstances are ones where I wanted to have the least suffering take place. There's lots of explanations people could give for those actions that they simply do not require appealing to them thinking that there's objective moral facts. So if you're a relativist, you could simply appeal to your own moral standards and you act in accordance with your moral standards. You don't have to think those moral standards are objectively true. You will see this a lot from realists that will say that people act as if realism is true. I don't know what is the implication there? That if you're a relativist, you don't act on your moral standards? That wouldn't make any sense. Why would I not act on my moral standards? There's nothing prohibiting me from doing so. Like, okay, I'm a moral anti-realist. I think nothing's objectively right or wrong. Okay, objectively speaking, from a moral perspective, I can do whatever I want. And that's exactly what I do. I do exactly what I want to do. Exactly. So if you say, okay, well, why aren't you out stealing if you're an anti-realist? There's nothing wrong with it. I don't steal because I don't want to. That's why I don't steal. I think stealing is bad. So if you said, well, why don't you want to? Well, I don't think it's very nice to steal from people. That's why I don't steal, because I don't want to. Now, if you can say, oh, well, what's your justification? I don't think I need a justification. What's your justification for liking pineapple on pizza? Now, if you say, well, because it tastes good, okay, how is that a justification? Well, when I make gastronomic decisions, I base it on okay, fine. If you consider that a justification, fine. But I don't think you need justifications for your preferences. They're just facts about what you like. So this idea that people, even if they say they're a relativist, they act like a realist, what do they think the behavioral differences are? How is a relativist supposed to act? Why would they act differently? So if you're a relativist and you think murder is wrong, you act on that basis of that. You vote for laws that are, prohibit murder. If someone's trying to murder someone, you say, hey, don't murder that person. Hopefully you intervene if you're able to do so. You do all those things. And then if you're a realist and you care about doing what the objective moral effects are, you do all those things. Why would there be any significant behavioral difference here? But the reason I stress this so much is because it's like I hear this almost. I hear this pretty much every week. Pretty much every week, someone says people act like realists. Realists, I don't think, act any significantly differently in most practical respects from relativists. Here's a difference between the sorts of things realists tend to do relative to relativists. They say things like, there are objective moral facts, or moral realism is true. Or they might say, relativists tend to act like realists. They say different things sometimes. That's about it. That's the big difference. I don't see any other significant difference. I would love to hear from a realist that thinks relativists, like it's an entailment of relativism, or more broadly, anti-realism, that you would act differently, or you would predict that they would act differently. Now, if you want to make a psychological claim that says, if you become an anti-realist, or you become a relativist, or you already were one, that there's some correlation between your behavior and those views, and that there may be some underlying causal factors, like, you care less about morality if you're a relativist, as some, quirk of human psychology. Fine, present the empirical evidence for that, because that's an empirical claim about human psychology. So if you're going to talk about logical entailments, it's just not true that relativism entails that. Like, in other words, it's not the case that if two people act the same and one is a realist and one is an anti-realist, and they're both like doing like a thing we all agree is good, like stopping a murder, that the realist is acting consistently with their moral values. Murder is objectively wrong. They're stopping the murder, so they're doing everything consistently. And then if you're a relativist or some other type of anti-realist, you can do that, but you're acting inconsistently. There's something inconsistent about like stopping a murder. That's not true. So as a matter of strict logical entailment, I don't see any reason why relativists should, on principle, act any differently from realists, except in certain trivial respects, like saying stuff like, I'm a relativist. Like, a realist probably wouldn't do that. I mean, everybody could lie, but so that might be a difference, but it's a trivial one. So I'm not saying there's literally no differences. I'm saying that the differences are trivial and they're not practically relevant for everyday moral conduct. So, so if you're saying it's an entailment issue, I think that's just wrong. If you're saying there's some contingent psychological differences between realists and anti-realists, fine, let's discuss the empirical data. I haven't seen anybody do that with me. I would love it if they did, because that's my area of specialization. I do psychology of metaethics. You want to talk about those studies? You want to talk about, the Young and Derwin paper or the Ryan Holyoke paper? I'm happy to talk about those papers. The Fisher et al. Paper. There's that stuff. So if someone ever wants to talk to me about the psychology of metaethics, I would be delighted to talk about it. Anyway, let's keep going.
And real, despite what people believe. C.S. Lewis put it this way in his book, Mere Christianity. He said, think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Think about that. You might as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. That's very interesting. So what C.S. Lewis said is pretty much true, right? It's like, you can't picture a society or a country where 2 and 2 made 5. You just can't do that. You also can't picture a country.
I literally can, because I've read 1984. I can picture a world where people say that. So I don't even accept the hypothetical, but just grant. If people actually believed like really bizarre math that didn't work, there would be all kinds of practical problems. And so, taking this charitably, I agree with this. I can't readily imagine a world where people really had like just totally goofy math. It's not going to work. And yeah, if people were uncooperative, they're not going to be able to maintain a productive civilization. So that's true too. That not super relevant to whether moral realism is true or not. So, it's also true that if we didn't have oxygen, we wouldn't be able to breathe. I mean, that doesn't mean moral realism is true. So of course, that's a silly comparison, because the cooperation is more closely tied to our conception of morality. But just the point here is that there may be objective, you could say stance independent facts about what institutions, norms, attitudes, and behavior are necessary for maintaining certain types of civilizations. So you could say, yeah, as a matter of objective fact, if a society does not have rules against murder or lying and stealing and respecting, people's rights and that sort of thing, the society's not going to function well. From the stand, like there'll be a higher death rate. There will be less economic productivity. There will be lower overall quality of life. You could say, conditional on the absence of certain norms and institutions, certain social, consequences would follow from that, and that could be stance independently true. Okay, that's a descriptive fact. It does not entail moral realism is true. It doesn't entail like those moral institutions, like rules against murder are good, stance independently. It would just mean those rules are closely tied. They're causally intertwined with certain sorts of social outcomes for human beings. Could totally be true. But it'd be just like, in a certain sense, it does actually function pretty much like, hey, people need food in order to maintain homeostasis or something like that. It's just going to be another type of descriptive fact.
Where hate is superior to love. You can't picture that, can you? That means that we all have a sense of right and wrong. We all have a sense of a moral law, what we ought.
And it just doesn't follow that, if there are certain types of objective facts about what's necessary for societies to function well, or at least what's like closely tied to them, functioning well under ordinary circumstances. Because you can imagine a society where they don't have any rules or institutions, but everyone's plugged into like an experience machine and they're all just in some blissful utopian simulation. Okay, so they don't need laws against murder because everyone's plugged in, So you can imagine weird cases where you don't have the rules, but generally speaking, under ordinary circumstances, if you don't have certain kinds of rules, you're going to get certain kinds of bad outcomes. But that doesn't mean people have a sense, like automatically have some kind of sense of right and wrong. That doesn't follow.
To do. You ought to not run away in battle. You ought to be courageous. You ought to love. You ought to do something that is better than something else. Absolute moral obligations exist, binding on all people independent of a person's opinion, all times and in all places. And this moral law assumes.
So here we just have an assertion. We're not saying an argument for the assertion, and that's fine. You can make assertions, but often you'll just see people intersperse assertions in the middle of a dialogue. But okay, why I think that that's true? How does that relate to the previous remarks? So we're seeing here remarks that I think that might persuade some. Oh yeah, I guess we do need those objective moral facts, but why? Why? What has been said that we need those moral, like objective moral facts or stance independent moral facts to account for? Nothing that I've heard.
A moral lawgiver really captured this. The moral argument is not dependent on the universal agreement of morality. So not everybody has to agree on what is right and wrong. Not everyone has to agree on this moral law. Some people may deny the existence of absolute morals. As a matter of fact, a lot of people do, and not all.
Notice that term, absolute morals. So it's very common even in academia for people to not be consistent with the term. You'll notice that I say objective and I'm like, I should stick with stance independent. I try to use that term stance independent because a lot of people interpret objective in ways other than stance independent. People will sometimes refer to the objective moral rules. They'll sometimes conflate moral facts with, objectivity sometimes is used interchangeably. But people will use other terms interchangeably that have such well-established alternative uses that it could be very confusing, and you could quickly mix people up by not being consistent with the terminology. And again, this isn't a problem in this video. This is a problem just in general. It's people not being consistent with terminology when I think that they should be, for the sake of avoiding confusion and mistakes. So here you heard that term absolute, and you'll sometimes hear the term universal. So you'll hear these other sorts of people will even say other stuff, transcendent. And, I say stance independent, but you'll still hear mind independent, observer independent. There's probably some other types of something or other independent. So we have a problem in academia, and I think that this spills over into discussions outside of academia where people are just not consistent with the terminology. I tend to prefer the term absolute to refer to a view on certain types of normative moral rules, which is normative moral rules that are exceptionless. So there's no circumstances in which the action is permissible. It's always impermissible, that sort of thing. So that'd be something like, like a mega Kantian perspective on lying. Like lying is absolutely wrong, or it's an absolute moral rule that lying is wrong. That would mean there are zero circumstances in principle in which lying would be morally permissible. That's how I tend to use the term absolute, but sometimes people use it interchangeably with stance independent or objective. And that's what this is sounding like here. And again, though, this is like everybody does this. So bummer for us.
All moral issues have easily recognizable answers. The moral argument means that the rudimentary principles of right and wrong exist whether people admit them. I'm going to butcher this name, but I think you say Budziszewski. Actually, you know what? Let me look that up. I have to watch a video for that? That sucks.
I like that was included because I often struggle to get people's names right. And I do think it's cool when you can and when you do. And I should probably make more of an effort to do that. So I like that was not edited out. That's cool. I know I'm not giving a lot of credit because I've been very critical of the video so far, but so far, look, I'm trying to be honest in my criticisms here, but I get passionate about this stuff, but I used to get angrier than I get anymore. It's just, I feel like I feel like maybe the discourse on meta ethics just needs to be elevated. And then a lot of the criticisms I make, I won't need to make them as much anymore. But, I like that. I think that there's something humanizing and cool about including that.
All right, so I looked up the pronunciation for this, and it's Budziszewski, I think. Budziszewski. The audio on those pronunciations were pretty bad. They sounded so old. I'm just going to say it like that. What's his name again?
I should say, and I saw a comment on this earlier, I would get rid of the blinking lights. I know I need a better background, but like I do have a LED over there, but I set it on purple because that's my favorite color. And if you disagree, you are incorrect. There's a couple other alternative colors that are acceptable. Teal is an acceptable favorite color. That's like my second favorite. But if you don't, it's not one of those, you're wrong. So I gotta fix that. I gotta get a new webcam. I got a lot of stuff. I'm happy with the microphone, I think. Headphones are nice. Most of the setup is nice, but I gotta work on it because this camera's no good and this background's no good. Like it's just that closet looks like it's about to like fall out of the frame. So not great.
Budziszewski is an author, and he wrote a book called What We Can't Not Know. And so he makes a case that there are moral principles that all of us cannot know. For example, you can't not know that killing innocent people for no reason is wrong.
Now, notice that again, wrong. Objectively wrong, stance independently wrong, or some other type of wrong. Wrong just in some metaethically neutral normative sense. It's not clear. I wish it would be clear. But yeah, here you have a claim, someone saying there's things people can't not know. Okay. Is there an argument for that? Is there evidence for that? I don't know that certain things are stance independently wrong because I don't believe they are. I can't know something if I don't believe it. So if someone's saying if people can't not know it, well, I don't know it. So if by wrong you mean stance independently wrong. So if the claim is all people know that certain things are stance independently wrong, well, I don't know that because I think it's not true and I don't believe it. So there you go.
Even people who do.
Yeah, so you do have this comment from Ben Roberts that says serial killers don't think it's wrong. I think the claim, and maybe they'll continue, like even they think it's wrong, I think is what the claim is going to be. And I think I saw this was right up about to the point where I stopped before. Cool.
Do such things have to somehow justify it or perform a ritual or something similar to that so that they can.
People that do these things have to somehow justify it or perform a ritual. It's an interesting claim. I think historically, if you looked at some people's conduct, they did absolutely horrific things and they saw absolutely no need to justify it. They would just go, this is just what we do. This is how we do it. So I just don't think this is true. I think lots of people did horrific things in the past. And it's not like they knew it was wrong and they had to rationalize it or do some ritual thing to account for why it was okay for them to do the thing. I think they just thought it was okay to do the thing. So but I mean, how do we adjudicate this? This is like a complicated question about anthropology and history and psychology. And these are empirical claims. And it's cool when people make these empirical claims, but I think people need to be more open to, hey, maybe those empirical claims are not correct. I don't know. Audience, what do you think? Do you think that everybody on some level knows that, let's say, like torturing people is wrong or whatever. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think if you look at certain historical populations, people were often incredibly brutal in a way that they don't seem to be remorseful about. But I don't know. I don't have the time machine to go back and survey people.
Justify their actions, and you wouldn't have to do that if you didn't know it was wrong. Serial killers know that murder is wrong. They just don't feel remorse. That is, after all, the definition of a psychopath.
There you go. See? So they explicitly...
Murder, for example, is wrong for everyone in every country globally. As the book of Romans says, the moral law is written on our hearts. In other words, in our conscience, we have this idea of a moral law. So we're going to provide 8 reasons why the moral law exists. And once again, if the moral law exists, if one moral obligation exists, the moral law exists. And if that law exists, the lawgiver exists. And there is nothing that describes that better than God. Reason number 1, the moral law is undeniable. Undeniable. Relativists always appear in these...
Watch this. I deny it. Refuted. I refute it thus. So yeah, I deny it. I deny that there is a moral law that where law is understood to require a lawgiver. I don't deny that there's laws. I just deny that there are some sort of special type of moral laws that require a lawgiver, and that lawgiver is God. I'm definitely denying that.
Discussions to make 2 primary truth claims.
Chopped that right in the middle of the...
Reason number 1, the moral law is undeniable. Undeniable.
Yeah, so Coffee Smoke says, everyone knows that at this pace, Lance will never get through the video. Oh, I know. I'm probably going to do 2 or 3 parts of this. I take my time. I see no reason not to go over everything thoroughly. And this is also how I write. So when I write, I dissect everything and pull it apart. So yeah, got a lot to say.
Relativists always appear in these discussions to make 2 primary truth claims. The first one is that there is no absolute truth, and the second one is that there are no absolute moral values. The first claim refutes itself. If there is no absolute truth...
Hold on. Let's be very careful about what was said there.
One is that there is no absolute truth, and the second one is...
Hold on.
Reason number 1, the moral law is undeniable. Undeniable. Relativists always appear in these discussions to make 2 primary truth claims. The first one is that there is no...
Okay, notice that he just says relativists here and not moral relativist or meta-ethical relativist. So if you're some type of global relativist and you are a relativist about all forms of truth, then you might say like all forms of truth is relative, and then even that claim is itself relative. And then someone might be able to present some argument that that's self-refuting, that at the very least, if you say all truths are relative, you can't say that the fact that all truths are relative is itself non-relative and have that be consistent with that claim. Those would be straightforwardly inconsistent. But notice that would you'd have to be some type of relativist that when you say certain types of truth are relative, that claim itself is included in the set of claims that are relative. If it's not, then you're not subject to some sort of self-defeat or contradiction. And meta-ethical relativism is a claim that first-order moral claims. So by first-order moral claims, I don't mean meta-ethical claims. It's first-order moral claims, claims about what's morally right or wrong, good or bad. So stuff like a prototypical first-order moral claim would be like lying is wrong or it's good to be nice to people. Something like there are no moral facts is not a first-order moral claim. It's a second-order moral claim. It's a claim about moral claims. So a meta-ethical relativist holds that first-order moral claims are relativized. They are not making a claim about second-order moral claims, and they're not necessarily making a claim about truth claims in general. And so that would include claims like all moral claims are relative. That claim is not itself necessarily relativized for a meta-ethical relativist. They would have to endorse some broader form of relativism. So this first argument is just not going to work against meta-ethical relativism. It could only, in principle, claim itself.
Absolute truth, and the second one is that there are no absolute moral values. The first claim refutes itself. If there is no absolute truth, you got to ask, is that true? Is it true that there are no absolute truths?
Now see, is it true that there's no absolute truths? How is that self-defeating? You say, yes, it's true that there's no absolute truths. What's the problem? What's the contradiction? Now, if you say, is it absolutely true that there's no absolute truths? Now you're going to have a problem if you say yes. Now you're contradicting yourself. But the relativist that thinks that there's no absolute truths is not obligated to think it's absolutely true that there's no absolute truths. They could just say, yes, it's true relative to my epistemic framework or whatever, or my perspective, that there are no absolute truths. What's the problem? There's no contradiction there. So even the global relativist, I don't even think that position is internally contradictory. So one, this is not a good critique of, if it were intended to be a critique of meta-ethical relativism, or you could say moral relativism, because the moral relativist is only committed to relativism about first-order moral claims, not about claims about whether there are absolute truths in some broader sense. So it just doesn't apply. Second, even if a person endorsed that view, it's not necessarily contradictory. They'd have to be a pretty stupid relativist to be subject to this kind of contradiction. Now, that isn't to say that some people aren't. People sometimes contradict themselves, but it's probably a pretty narrow slice. I mean, you would have to find a really specific type of relativist in order to find someone that's subject to this contradiction. How many atheists that reject moral realism have a view like that? I don't know. But let's say it's 5%. Okay, so 5% of them are wrong. What about the other 95%?
Or there is no absolute truth. And if it is true, well, then the claim cannot be true.
Oh, that's a good point. So Sapir says someone could technically say there exists no absolute truth except that there are no absolute truths, or the only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth. Yeah, you can say that. There's nothing logically inconsistent about that. It might look to people to be suspiciously ad hoc, like, your theory is like a theory about everything else except itself. That looks a little suspicious. And I would agree with that. I would think that's a pretty weird position to take. But there's nothing logically inconsistent about it. You're not making a mistake in terms of consistency if you make that sort of claim. That's a good point. And I think it's worth stressing that point because, look, people take weird positions on stuff. That position's like weird, but what's the objection? Why is it wrong?
Because it fails on its own criteria. It doesn't meet its own criteria. That is because self-refuting statements never avoid what they say we should avoid, or they affirm what they deny. The second claim makes a different type of contradiction. It's not necessarily, when you say there are no absolute moral values, at face value, it's not contradictory, but it commits practical suicide. And that's something that is a self-refuting. It's a type of self-refuting claim that Greg Koukl came up with, or he came up with that name for that type.
By the way, this is getting to the part of the video I haven't seen, so I don't know what's going to be said here. Hopefully, it's just all totally acceptable stuff for this channel, but warning in advance, this is content I haven't seen yet.
Of self-refutation in his book, Tactics. And I talked about that in my last podcast episode, 5 tactics that you should know to become a beast at sharing your faith in 2024. So I touched on that in that video, but this is because the existence of absolute values is practically undeniable. That's why practically it's contradictory.
I'm curious what practical undeniability is going to be.
It commits practical suicide. The relativist wants everyone to value him as a person, while he rejects that there are values for all persons.
The relativist wants everyone to value them as a person, but they reject what? You hear that again.
Your faith in 2024. So I touched on that in that video, but this is because the existence of absolute values is practically undeniable. That's why practically it's contradictory. It commits practical suicide. The relativist wants everyone to value him as a person.
Let's write that down. The relativist wants everyone to value them as a person. Okay.
While
So, oh no. I think I had some connection issue here. Am I still here? I just had a connection issue. Give me 1 second. One moment. All right. Are we good? I had some kind of issue there, just had to get it fixed. Okay, and then the other statement was this one. So here's the problem. First, it is not an entailment of relativism that you want everybody to value you. Second, it is not an entailment of relativism that you reject that there are values for all persons. It's completely consistent with relativism to not want everyone to value you and to value everybody else. Like you can do that. Relativism only says moral claims are true or false relative to something. The standards of individuals, the standard of groups, whatever. Now, in practice, you could say, because this is about a practical issue. And so fair enough. It's already been made clear. This is not intended to be some sort of like logical entailment. So that concern, we could set that aside. The question is, in practice, are relativists going to want other people to value them? Yeah, probably. Like they're not going to say, yeah, I don't care if you steal my stuff. I don't value myself. They're going to want other people to care about them. And then the issue is, they don't think people have that there is value for all persons. That's the claim. Now, that doesn't follow. There's nothing inconsistent in practice with a relativist. And I think this would generally be true if you're a relativist. You want everyone to value you and you value everyone else. Now, you don't have to value everyone else's moral values. You could say, yeah, I value everybody. If all else being equal, I wouldn't want someone to suffer horribly for no reason. I wouldn't want anybody to go to hell and have eternal conscious torment. I don't want that stuff to happen to people. But the relativist might say, look, but if someone's going to steal from other people, I'm going to try to stop them, or I'm going to oppose that. It might even be because they value other people, not even just themselves. So in practice, it's going to be the case that relativists want people to care about them and they generally care about other people. I don't see what the issue is. It's not the case that relativists don't think other people have value.
Anyone who denies all values values their right to deny them. So here's an example of this practical suicide. So Norman Geisler suggested to his audience in Chicago one time that objective moral values exist. One lady stood up and affirmed that no such values exist and everything is a matter of taste or opinion. So Norman says the following, and I quote, "I resisted the temptation to make my point by shouting, 'Sit down and shut up, you egghead. Who wants to hear your opinion?' Of course, if I had been so rude or discourteous, she would have rightly complained that I had violated her right to her opinion and her right to express it, to which I could have replied, 'You have no such right. You just told me such rights don't exist.' Her complaint..."
Yeah, see, it's weird. You don't have to invoke objective rights. You could invoke intersubjective rights, or you could just appeal to your own preferences. Now, someone might not care about your preferences, but that doesn't mean you can't invoke them. It doesn't mean you can't act in accordance with them. I have preference. Because of my preferences, I think certain foods are gross. If you give me that food and I eat it, I'm going to go, ugh, this is gross. It'd be weird to say, you can't say that because nothing is objectively gross. It just doesn't follow that if something isn't objectively the case, that you can't act on it, that you can't, express an attitude, that you can't want people to act a certain way. There's just no inconsistency there. There just isn't. Does it you're playing a game with another person. Now, are people objectively obligated to follow the game's rules? No, you could just change the rules, do whatever you want. Maybe someone would say, well, technically you're not playing the game, whatever. If you're sitting down with someone to play a game and they do something other than what's officially in the rules of the game, fine, whatever. They're doing a thing. You could say conceptually it's not playing the game. If you object to that, you might say, look, I thought we had agreed that we were going to play the game by the rules, and now you're not following the rules. I don't like that. Now, if that person cares about your attitudes, they might go, I'm sorry, I'll follow the rules. I won't, make these, questionable decisions in the game or whatever. But if they don't care, they might say, I don't care. Now, the same is true if you're a realist in principle. You say, hey, it's objectively morally wrong to do such and such. A person could say, so I don't care. Ultimately, I think how people react to things comes down to their goals and attitudes and motivations. And, this I think is not an issue that it would be easy for realists to escape from. So you come across, aliens come to Earth and they want to vaporize the planet. Would you try to convince them it's objectively morally wrong to do so? I mean, what if they're like, okay, well, according to your realist standards and your intuition, yeah, okay, fine. And then they still want to go ahead and vaporize. Now what? So in certain cases, one, it's not obvious that the agents are automatically motivated by belief that a certain thing is an objective moral fact. It's not obvious that that's true, that there's some necessary connection between belief and motivation to act. I'm going to try to make the case for that, but I haven't seen anyone. I think that's ridiculous, and I haven't seen anyone make a good case for it. A lot of realists, even non-naturalist realists, are externalists about motivations. They don't think that belief in the moral facts is necessarily motivating. They might think it's tightly contingently motivating for humans, but it doesn't have to be for aliens. It doesn't have to be for an AI. It doesn't have to be for people with, certain types of psychological setups. Maybe they just don't care. And so that even seems consistent with what a lot of moral realists think. So yeah, there's something very strange about this notion that like there's an implication that anti-realists can't object, or that they're doing something inconsistent with their commitments if they do. And they're just not. There's no inconsistency with getting mad if someone starts yelling at you, if you're a relativist.
It would have proved that she actually did believe in the real absolute value.
You see? So there's the implication. If you don't want someone to do something to you, it must be because you're a realist. That's just not true. That hasn't been shown. There hasn't been any explanation for why you would have to think that in order to express these attitudes. So if I say, hey, I don't want you to yell at me. Don't call me names. Don't tell me to shut up and sit down. Why would I have to think it's objectively wrong to say that and to think that and to feel that way? So if you say, what do you mean? You say, I don't want you to do that. Please don't do that. Now, the fact that you could say, but I don't care about what you think. Okay, so but what's the inconsistency with me not wanting you to do that? The answer is there isn't any. There's just no inconsistency here. You don't have to be a realist to have normative attitudes and to act on them. You just don't. And nobody's showing you don't. It's just being implied or asserted. And that's so deeply frustrating that no one is showing the actual inconsistency. So I would love for the person on this channel, anybody that thinks this, any realist, philosopher they're quoting, whatever, they're welcome to come on my channel and lay out what they think the logical inconsistency is. If you're a relativist or an anti-realist, with saying things like, and sincerely meaning them, I don't want you to do that. Don't treat me that way. That's wrong. What is the inconsistency?
Valued her right to say that there are no absolute values. In other words, even those who deny all values, nevertheless, value their right to make that denial, and therein lies the inconsistency. Moral value.
So, what?
And her right to express it. To which I could have replied, you have no such right. You just told me such rights don't exist. Her complaint would have...
See, that's the thing. Such rights don't exist. So a relativist can believe in some sort of like constructivist procedure where, hey, we've all agreed on constructive... Like, I think that there are like rights in the United States. I think that there's laws that protect my rights. I think that those rights are like constructed and intersubjectively enforced to the degree that people are disposed to enforce them. So like there are rights, like I think money exists. I don't think there's like things have intrinsic values of monetary. Like I don't think like this cup is intrinsically $1.50. Its $1.50-ness is contingent on facts about what people are willing to pay for it and sell it for. And I also think that rights are like that. Rights are sort of intersubjectively mediated. And so a person could just say, no, of course I think there are rights. I just don't think that the rights are sort of backed by or grounded in stance independent moral facts. Is there a logical inconsistency there? I don't think so. So there's just something strange about, again, characterizing it as though if you're an anti-realist, you don't think morality is real, or you don't think people have rights, or you don't think people have value. None of that follows. Those are normative claims, not meta-ethical claims. There's nothing about anti-realism, I'm repeating myself, that prohibits you from valuing people. I want to get to this supposed inconsistency here.
Have proved that she actually did believe in the real absolute value. She valued her right to say that there are no absolute values. In other words,
so you can value your right to say that there's no absolute values. That valuing does not have to be an absolute value. You could subjectively value it. If we're just going to run with some type of subjectivism, you could say, I subjectively value my view that there are no objective values or absolute values. We're not going to be consistent with the terminology. Too bad. What's the contradiction? The answer is there isn't one. There is nothing wrong with value. You can just value things in a non-objective way.
Words, even those who deny all values, nevertheless...
deny all values. The anti-realist, including the relativist, does not deny all values. They deny stance independent or objective values. Doesn't mean they deny all values. It's just not true.
Value their right to make that denial, and therein lies the inconsistency. Moral values are practically undeniable.
Right. So the mistake here is to think that if you're a relativist or some type of anti-realist, that you deny all values. But when you react to someone like by objecting, you're valuing your rights or your ability to hold your view or your you value not being subjected to whatever it is that they're doing that you don't want. So the view is that you think that there are no values, but you also think that there are values. That's supposed to be the inconsistency. You think there are no values and that there are values. There's your inconsistency. Relativists don't think there are no values. Problem solved.
End quote. That right there, guys, is very true. Every moral relativist is going to say that morality is relative and that there are no real values, but then
see, relative, no real values. We're getting that again. They're relative, there's no non-relative values. That's what
going to value or behave as if we all should value their right to hold that opinion. That you shouldn't try to convince them otherwise, or that you can't force them to believe anything else, or that you ought not to force somebody to believe something that they don't believe in. And if that is true, well, then the moral relativism already falls on its face. So that's practical suicide too, by the way. And this shows that practically it's inevitable.
By the way, even if moral relativism is false, that doesn't mean moral anti-realism is false or that moral realism is true. Relativism is just one type of anti-realism. So like showing that relativists, like even if you could show relativists are hopelessly mired in contradictions and are totally just the biggest idiots in the universe, that's still not a refutation of anti-realism, nor does it show realism is true.
The moral law, you cannot deny it. It's inevitable. This is one way. Reason number two, our reactions help us discover the moral law. That's a key word right there, discover. And the moral law is basically right from wrong. So in Norman's example, the lady's reaction would have shown her or reminded her that absolute moral values do exist. Norman provides another example from a real story. So here's that example. In the book, a professor at a major university in Indiana told his students to write on an ethical topic with a thesis backed by reasons and documentation. One atheist student eloquently wrote on the topic of moral relativism. His theory was that all morals are relative. There is no absolute standard of justice or rightness. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla, and so on. The student met all the requirements for a good grade and was presented in a handsome blue folder. After reading,
we already know where this is going. This kind of story sounds really apocryphal to me. I love documentation, but my prediction is that the instructor or whatever is going to give the student like an F or something like that, and then say, well, they argued it's all relative, so they can't object. It's going to be this. This is where I think this is going to go, and it's going to be the same thing as the first case. So maybe
the entire paper, the professor wrote on the front cover, F, I don't like blue folders. And then
called it.
And the student he was enraged. He told the professor, that's not fair. That's not just. That's not right.
Yep. Yeah. So you could be a relativist or an anti-realist and think that's not fair. That's not right. That's not just. No contradiction.
You didn't grade the paper on its merits. The professor respectfully explained to the student. He was like, hold on. Isn't your paper the one that argued that there's no standard of justice or rightness?
A relativist doesn't hold that there's no standard of justice. They hold that there's no objective or stance-independent standard of justice. But again, I'm repeating myself. So,
and then he asked the student why he accused him of not being fair, right, and just, if that's the thing that he denied on his paper. The professor quoted the student as saying that morality is a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla, therefore he doesn't like blue. F, I don't like blue folders. That's what he told him. And so this showed the student he truly did believe that the student himself.
Yeah, see, it's this argument for like crypto realism, that we're all secretly realists and we just don't realize it. So you get this a lot, and it's pretty frustrating. So Oscar asks, WTF does, quote, can't object mean here? So typically it doesn't mean like literally you can't object. So if someone said you can't object to people stealing from you if you're an anti-realist, it would be really uncharitable, I think, to say that they mean you like actually can't object, like you couldn't, someone stealing and you just, there's nothing you could do because you're an anti-realist. The idea would typically be that if you do object, and typically the idea is you do in fact object. So here's what the issue is. The criticism goes something like this. If you were a moral realist, if you were acting consistently with that, you couldn't object to someone stealing from you. You in fact would practice object to people stealing from you. And this shows a performative contradiction. Your actions are inconsistent with what you say your meta-ethical views are. And this shows that you're actually acting like a realist. You're not acting like a relativist. And this shows on some implicit level, deep down, you're a realist, you act like a realist, you probably know you're a realist. And so your stated commitment to relativism is false. Maybe you're dishonest about it. Maybe you're just stupid. Whatever the idea would be. The idea would be that you are, at the very least, for whatever reason, mistaken about your own meta-ethical views. That's what the idea is. So that's behind the whole can't object. Of course, the issue is that it is consistent with relativism to object. So these kinds of objections are simply not true, and they do not show any performative contradiction.
Of not.
Oh, yeah. So Moxie says, definitely true story. Yeah, my reaction to this is that whole that happened. You know, like, sure, that happened. That I don't think these stories actually happened. They sound apocryphal.
The professor, not me, not you, but the student who wrote claiming that there is no real moral value, there is no standard of justice. He ended up behaving and believing that there is a standard of justice, that he should be treated with value, with justice, with fairness, with rightness. So that's very funny. So the moral of the story here is that ultimately, whether you believe in moral values or not, you want everyone to treat you as if there are moral values, and that people should value that towards you. All you need to do is, don't do this obviously, but all you would have to do is maltreat relativists, and their reactions will reveal their belief in the absolute moral law. Our reactions reveal that.
All you have to do is just mistreat them. Don't do that if you're a realist. Don't mistreat relativists or anti-realist to show that we're engaged in performative contradictions. That's not cool. But there's something amusing about that suggestion.
Relativism is unlivable. You can't live out moral relativism. You just can't do it. You can't do it. You're going to treat everyone as if they're innately valuable, or you're going to behave as if people should treat you as if you are innately valuable. And you have the right to life, the right to opinion, the right to speech, to believe whatever you want to believe, to do whatever you want. So people claim to be relativists, but don't want their spouses to live deep one right there. And this is something that Norman says in his book. Men don't want their wives to be relatively faithful. They don't want that. In other words, their spouses should.
Okay, that's just equivocating on the meaning of relatively. So if you say someone is relatively faithful, you mean like there's being completely faithful and being not faithful at all, and being relatively faithful is somewhere in between. That's just a different meaning of the term relative. It has nothing to do with a semantic thesis about the indexicalization of first order normative claims. If you say, I want my partner to be like relatively faithful, that's not what is meant by relative in most contexts in which people would use that phrase there. That means something like, I want my partner to be pretty faithful, maybe not necessarily completely faithful. Now, I doubt anyone would say that. He's probably right about that. It has nothing to do with metaethics.
Should live like adultery is absolutely wrong. Again, it's unlivable. You can't live out moral relativism. You just can't.
Note the sort of rhetorical element of this. Like the implication here is if you were really consistently living like a relativist, you wouldn't care if your spouse had an affair or something like that. And, you know, for a lot of people, if they're listening to this, they might recoil at that because it's invoking, you know, for many people, a sort of deep anxiety and concern that they have, that they don't want someone to cheat on them because it can be hurtful and painful and awful and a very bad experience. And it's, hey, you don't want to endorse this metaethical view because it like it has these horrible consequences. There's a bit of an emotional appeal here. I understand why it's being done. I wish people wouldn't do this because I think there's something a bit rhetorical about it. And by a bit, I mean a lot. But yeah.
If a polygamist, think of it this way. If a polygamist or polyamorous relativist accepts sexual relativism, which is polygamy, he will behave as if murder or rape is wrong if someone attempted that on him or her. Think about that. You could be polygamous. You could believe in sexual relativism. But as soon as somebody grapes you or tries to murder you, all of a sudden relativism is not real. All of a sudden that person shouldn't behave based on their relative moral feeling towards you. It's unlivable. If you're liking this video so far, make sure that you subscribe.
Yeah, so it's the same issue
Norman
over
brilliantly articulated.
As you see, it's the same issue. It's just this idea that if you're not a moral realist, then like certain sorts of practical certain sorts of practical consequences follow that largely have to do with your attitude towards others and your normative moral standards. And relativism just isn't a view about your attitudes or normative moral standards. So there's just I hate to put it this way, but a profound and deep confusion about the implications of relativism. I'm only 14 minutes in the video. I've been talking about an hour and a half, but it's the same thing over and over. So hopefully that there'll be some different points being made here at some point.
Relates his point even further. He examples the idea of Osama bin Laden and the Muslim terrorists who thought that flying our planes into our buildings with our innocent loved ones in them was morally right. And some people will say that too. Some relativists will say
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about affairs being heavy duty rhetoric. I mean, this is like excessive rhetoric. Like, hey, endorse this medical view, or you're not against what's being described in this video. I don't typically like to even have this kind of content come up, so it's not my favorite content to come up. But yeah, I mean, people will make these really extreme appeals and say, hey, if anti-realists have to be less concerned about the worst things that have ever happened in the world, and I really think it sucks. I mean, you're getting a glimpse here because I don't normally show examples like this. Because keep in mind, this is a view that I spend a lot of my time defending. And if someone says, hey, if you defend that view, you're either they would say, I can't sincerely hold my view. So they're like, I'm dishonest or whatever. Or I really would have to be okay with the worst things that have ever happened. And both of those, I find, it's not just that they're not true. They're personally pretty insulting. This is not cool, what's being said here.
well, what about the terrorists? They think that, committing jihad is morally right, that's what their God wants them to do. But how about this? What would happen if we had flown bin Laden?
Okay, hold up. I'm seeing people in the comments saying that I need mods. What do I need mods for? Is it the person shouting stuff about repenting? Yeah, if that happens again, then I'll have to boot them out of here. And might as well pause and talk about something else. I know I've said a lot of the same things, so I'm going to try to avoid doing that for the rest of this video. I'm certainly receptive to mods, especially for people that have been here a long time, and if I know who you are. So if you want to be mods, just get in touch. On my page, you could find my email. Contact me if you want to be a mod. I'm also happy to talk about it here. Okay, so Jason, please don't do that. And if you do it again, you're out of here. I will do whatever I need to do. I don't know if I've banned people before, but I will do so if I need to. Okay, so what other spam is there? Oh, wow, it's been going on for a while. Okay. Yeah, you don't get any other warnings. You're out now. Give me a moment so that I can deal with that. I do, yeah. So I need mods because now I'm going to have to deal with this now. Oh, right. I'm seeing an option to put them in timeout, but I'm not seeing something to just straight up block them. How do I do that? Yeah, if they made 4 comments like that, that's too many. Probably give people a couple strikes if they want to be silly, but this has got to go. Okay, so I'm going to just choose this timeout thing for now, and I'll figure out what to do with them later. Select hide from channel. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah, so don't come into my channel and start typing things in all caps. I will remove you. It's really disruptive because I don't have mods, so it's going to make me extra annoyed if you do that. Don't do that. Not cool. And I don't know why you like. This is what happens when you don't have mods. Okay. So does anyone? I guess I'll just ask. And please don't be offended if I don't make you a mod. But does anyone here want to be a mod? And then I'll make judgments about how trustworthy you are. And if I don't choose you, it's because I don't trust you. No, but I want to figure out if I could get at least elevate 1 or 2 people to be mod, to have mod responsibilities. Leo, I know you. I'll make you a mod if you want. Do you want to be a mod? Am I trustworthy? No, you're not. No, it's not that. It's just that there's some people that I've had correspondence with off of here, and I've known them for a long time, or even before I was on the channel, and I'm going to take those judgments into consideration. Yeah, Nitty, you're all over the place, and you just tried to help me out, so I can make you a mod. Okay, you're a moderator now. Boom. Okay. This is cool. It's getting popular enough that I need mods. That's awesome. All right, so both of you are mods. Yeah. So, and also, Leo, we got to get in touch with about there's been some commentary on people about definitions of realism and anti-realism, and I've seen some really fun stuff. They're going to have to update those Stanford Encyclopedia pages. You probably know what I'm talking about, because people will take parts of the Stanford Encyclopedia entries on realism and anti-realism, and they'll just sort of pull them out of their context and say that these kind of unconventional definitions are like standard, and then they'll argue about what the definitions are. I've consulted people because I know people that work in academic metaethics. These days, pretty typical definition of moral realism is usually identified with its robust realism, which is the view that there are stance-independent moral facts. Some people have construed it simply as the view that there are moral facts. And so that's going a little further than something like cognitivism, which is simply moral claims can be true or false. But someone could in principle say they could be true or false, and there are none that are true or something like that. But if you hold that sort of minimal realism, that's actually going to include a lot of kinds of relativism. And it seems a little strange to include just straight up relativism in the definition of realism. Like relativism is by definition realism is a pretty weird and wild stance to take. Distinction in terms of stance dependence versus stance independence, like whether the moral facts are made true by our attitudes and values or not, but it's making it the case of if you think there's any moral truths at all. Now, people have construed it that way historically, and some people still do. And sometimes people will say stuff like, you'll see writings from philosophers, they're like, it's the view that there are moral facts. And then they'll add afterwards, it's the view that they're stance independent, or they don't depend on people's values or whatever. The problem with that is that people will carelessly go in and quote the first sentence, it's the view that there's moral facts, and then lose the whole rest of it, where it talks about how the facts have to be objective or whatever. Now, I don't want to get too much into it, but this definition jostling that people get into is really, really frustrating. So I am calling on meta-ethicists. We all need to meet up, and we need to figure out a consistent way of defining and using terminology so that we can really talk about things. Okay, let's see what else is going on in the chat. Oh, right. Oh, Superior, you're always around, so I'll make you a mod too. I don't know if I need 3, but I don't want to be rude and exclude people. Okay. So Michael Ellerkamp says, is responding to somebody else. A theist could accept God is not an objective standard, but the most ideal subjective standard to use. Yeah, they could. And that's like ideal observer theory could be really similar to, like, it could be the view. You could think this. You could think we should do whatever a fully informed, perfectly rational agent would do given the same like information and circumstances and everything. So basically, if a being was omniscient, what would they do? Okay, we should do that. And then you could just think there is a being like that. That's God. So you should do what God would do. No inconsistency there. I would see that as a type of moral anti-realism. But it's a type of moral anti-realism that is, and some realists that have objected to characterizing that as anti-realism have pointed out, and I think correctly, like rightly so, even for stuff like divine command theory and that sort of thing. If someone says, look, moral facts are made true by God's standards, but God's standards are necessary, those facts are in important ways like non-contingent. Like God can't get hit on the head and have a different set of moral standards tomorrow on these views. There are these immutable, eternal moral facts, even if they were made true by God. And so in that sense, technically it's a type of anti-realism because they're stance dependent. They're not contingent in the way that human values are. And typically people like realists that are concerned with anti-realism are concerned with that like contingency, the contingent arbitrary aspects of them. So this is a type of, you could call it a type of anti-realism, and I do, but it is a type of anti-realism that's functionally a lot more like realism, but it's not the same thing. So maybe you could put it in its own category. The terminology and the categories we use don't, carve the conceptual space at, perfectly at all the sort of definitional junctures that you might want to. Okay. All right. So we got the mod situation handled. A question about that, because I really don't know. Are you, if I stream in the future, will those of you that I've given mod privileges now still have them in future streams, or do I have to like remod people every time? I hope I don't have to remod people every time, because that'll be frustrating. Yeah, so this is a comment I can resonate with. So Miss Java Wolf says, I'm always just a bit split about this. On the one hand, I want Lance's channel to grow, but it's so much more comfy when it's small. So in the future, there will probably be a way for me to do special events, because I really want to, where if the channel does get big, I'd like to still be able to talk to like the people that have been around for a long time. So I don't know exactly how I can manage that, but I do want to be able to still interact with people. I don't want it to be, you know, I do want it to be the point where there's so much text flying by, I can't monitor it, and I need 12 mods and people scream about repentance, and then they have to get, I don't like that part, but that's a byproduct of having more viewers. So I want that circumstance, but I don't like when that becomes such a burden that it makes everything less personal. Unfortunately, I would love to say I'd like to keep things personal. If that ever happens, I don't think that they will. I just don't think it's going to happen. And that's a bummer. It's a bummer I'm willing to accept, but it's a bummer nevertheless. Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. So I've gotten this message. Hey, Lance, hope you're doing great. So yeah, get in touch. It'd be great to talk some more. Maybe I could like start a channel and then not advertise it, and then I could secretly tell all of you. And then you could just see me over there when I stream, and I could do it once in a while. I don't know. I have some thoughts on that. I'll share them later. I'm planning things. Yeah. So someone's talking about this. Ben Roberts says meta ethics conference, but is there an objectively better ethics conferences? So there's Mad Meta it's Wisconsin, right? Madison. Yeah. And that's every other year. And that's kind of like they have this, I think it's Mark Sanders. They give out a variety of prizes and funding for things, but there's it's a meta ethics prize, which is cool. It's like every other year. I got to submit something to it sometime. I said I was going to do it the last round, and then I just didn't. I think that was last year. I don't remember. I think it was last year. So there are meta ethics conferences. I think there's one happening in the Netherlands, and there's like workshops and stuff. Maybe that's the one in the Netherlands. So there's 2 or 3 of those. Usually every year I see 2 or 3. There's not a ton of them. I got to get out to them. So, you know, it costs money. I'm not rolling in it. So it's hard for me to get out to these sorts of events, but it would be cool because I would like to, be physically present. I don't know. What was this? I'm like, I want basically, I could be on YouTube all day long talking about meta ethics, but academic philosophers are probably not watching this channel, at least most of them. So they don't even know who I am. And it'd be cool for me to talk to them and them to know about what I do, like on here. I don't know, but I got to get out there. And I do write papers on this stuff. I haven't put out any recently, but they're on the way. But yeah, maybe I could do like an online workshop. I don't know. Oh, right. Just trying to go through here to get caught up, and then we could get back to the video. It's been almost 2 hours. I feel like I could keep going though, so I'm fine. Maybe this will just be a super long stream. I'm eventually going to have to cut out like clips, and for people, because most people aren't going to want to watch like 2 and 3 and 4 hour things. What I might do, I could do this now. I see like over 40 people in here now, so maybe it's a bad idea. But I'm thinking maybe in the stream, go have a break, go have lunch, come back and start a second stream. I think I might do that. Yeah, because it's better than leaving you all like waiting around. So I think I'm going to do something like that. Today is just a stream day, I guess. Okay. Moxie says, independent. If we take a pantheist view where the universe itself can hold values, would you consider that realist? So it's really, I would need to ask questions of the person that has that view. So I would say it's probably not going to be a type of realism, only because so the question would be, are the moral facts made true by some stance? If they are, anti-realism. If they're not, could be realism. Now it's a little difficult to specify like what a stance is. So, you could have a stance in a psychological sense. Like I have stances on like what food is good or bad. And I would say that that's instantiated in behavioral dispositions. You could say it's even instantiated in certain types of brain configurations. Like my brain is structured a particular way. Like I have a stance on pineapple on pizza. I approve of it. I think it's good. I could get hit in the head. It could, some neurons, it destroys some neurons in my brain that make pineapple taste good. And then my attitude changes. Now, that's a super far-fetched and implausible thing, but maybe in the future, evil neuroscientists will, surgically change people's brains so they don't like pineapple on pizza. And like, it's at least logically possible that there's some physical change you could make to my brain. So there's those stances that you could say, yeah, they relate to like brain states, mental states, psychological states, that sort of thing. But I also think it makes sense to talk about like, well, what's the Bible stance on abortion or something like that? The Bible's not a person. The Bible doesn't have psychological states. So what are we saying there? Well, you could say it's a little metaphorical, but I don't even want to say it's metaphorical. I could say, I'm fine with saying that like a text, things can be right or wrong relative to the moral rules outlined in a text, even if the text isn't instantiated or reflecting the views of any particular individual. I could, go on ChatGPT and say, hey, give me a hypothetical set of moral rules of an alien civilization, or just come up with a set of moral rules. And then things could be true or false relative to the standards of fictional beings, or they could be true or false relative to the standards of some list of standards, right? And so I would be fine with saying that list of standards can be characterized as a stance. Things can be indexed to that. So you can talk about whether an action is or isn't consistent with some list of standards, even if they're not anybody in particular standards. So I just view stance as I'm using it as a technical term, but I haven't fully fleshed out what exactly a stance is. But I just take it as like a real hypothetical or possible perspective from which, or according to which, a claim could in principle be indexed. Something like that. Is that an okay technical definition? I don't know. Maybe there's more work to do on it. Maybe it could even be a whole paper that I write in the future. Probably want to get some collaborators. I don't know why I got so many hands going on. I got it. Why am I'm like talking like this? What is happening? Okay. So would I consider it realist? Probably not. But yeah, again, it's going to depend on the details. All right. Still going through here. And yeah, I got some stuff to cover on TikTok. I got to get, like I said, the streams on there are where I really want to be at, but I want to make some of the short form content there too. Okay, see, so someone's suggesting this and I'll put it up here, but I'm not comfortable with that. So you'll probably make a big impact on the field by submitting an abstract, maybe run a GoFundMe. I don't think I'm that important to the field of metaethics. And I'm serious about that. I don't think that's false modesty. There's a bunch of work going on academically. I have some things to say about it, but I don't think that the kinds of thing I'm doing here are super duper relevant to ongoing academic discussions. Like, how much am I really saying that's contributing something of technical value to evolutionary debunking arguments or companions and guild arguments? There's already people that would make the same response I would to companions and guild arguments in the literature. They would just say, yeah, you could be a global skeptic, not a problem. It's not self-defeating. Maybe Klein has a paper that says something pretty similar to that. So yeah, I have things to contribute to academic metaethics. The unintelligibility thesis is going to be a tough sell, but maybe that could be an important contribution. I don't know. But I really think that the best thing I could do in that space is argue against the idea of, like, you could say, call it folk realism. I think my major contribution is arguing that it's not the case that most non-philosophers are moral realists. Now, some people say, okay, but that's not really very relevant to whether realism is true or not. Maybe it's not. So, I don't know that that's really going to be that big of a contribution. But it would be cool to get out to some of those events. I mean, really what I'm hoping for, GoFundMe was like more of a one-off thing. I got to do a better job of advertising. Like, I mean, I'm on TikTok, I blog, I do the YouTube channel, but I haven't done a big, like, a fundraiser push, like, hey, sign up on Patreon. Like, all those options are available. Not too many people do it. I'd love if they did. But my attitude about that is I get real uncomfortable when I see people constantly trying to get people to subscribe or pay, which is weird, because what is wrong with that? I can't think of anything wrong with that. I guess I've just seen too many people that I feel like their motivation is or shifts towards or shades into something kind of mercenary about why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm doing this stuff because I care about it. But, you know, if I was like this big YouTuber that was like making a living doing this, that would be awesome. So, but I don't know what effect that would have on what I did. I mean, I get a better camera. The camera's not bad. It's just that whole thing with it cutting out every once in a while. Oh, and the wobbling. So I have an old IKEA desk, and this is on top of a carpet, and I stacked enough. It's like 80 pounds of books on the sides to try to hold it down, but it wobbles. Like, look, you see? If I just touch the desk, well, I mean, I'm kind of hitting it, but let's see if I move the mouse around. Yeah, see, look there, see? So that's just me moving the mouse forward. It causes everything to wobble. So I got this old wobbly IKEA desk. I'm not going to point the camera down, but it's so worn down that like the interior, like the exterior is like, you see how it's the black? It's actually worn off all on here. It actually scrapes up my arms. So I have like, I've put cushions on it and stuff before. So yeah, I need some new stuff. The computer's old. There was a couple streams I was in where people heard it. Now when I turn the computer on, it makes horrible, it goes like, so that thing's ancient and making noises. I got to get some new stuff, and I'm not in a position to do that. So at least I have nice headphones, which a friend gave to me. So thanks to them, they know who they are. So that really helped me out a lot. But yeah, I'd love to get out to some of these conferences. For a while, I was just, travel is tough for me. It's not a lot of fun, but I need to do it. So even if I don't really like it very much. Okay. Oscar says it would be neat to talk about the arbitrariness objection. It is a big part of my anti-realism, and you seem to think it is really meh. Is a big part of your anti-realism arbitrariness? Huh. I need to know what you mean. I would see some people raising concerns about anti-realism by appealing to it being arbitrary. So, you know, that's a big motivator behind Enoch's deliberative indispensability. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. I thought I had a great discussion with Enoch. And yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a good discussion, but we didn't even get to deliberative indispensability or some of the other arguments. And I think that's his sort of one of his signature arguments that is like he came up with that, which is pretty cool. You're seeing like new arguments for realism. Humor has some too. Good question. So Rainbow Beat says, do animals have morals? It's like one of those frustrating questions. I like the question. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the question. It's the kind of question where when you say, do animals have morality or do animals have morals? It depends. I would say no, and then I would give a characterization of morality that's like pretty narrow, but that's my preference and how I use terminology. If you say things like, do animals have an evolved predisposition? Do some animals have an evolved predisposition to engage in certain forms of prosocial behavior? Yes. Do some animals exhibit apparent, like behaviorally, do they appear to exhibit concern for the welfare of members of their species or whatever? Yes, like clearly. So do animals appear to show remorse in some cases? Kind of looks like that to me. So there's lots of ways in which you could argue animals exhibit various types of, like, at the very least, proto-morality. So that seems to be evident in the way that certain animals behave, especially like primates, certain kinds of mammals, dolphins and whales and stuff. So you see vampire bats, like they do like the food sharing thing. There's reciprocal altruism. I don't actually know if that's been super well validated. Maybe that, like, I don't trust most experimental psychological research anymore. For all I know, the research in other fields is a bunch of exaggerated and false claims too. I don't know. So, but animals engage in reciprocal altruism, some of them at least. And there's eusocial species like ants. Are they being moral when they like die for the hive? I mean, they're being altruistic. So you'll sometimes see people in the psychological literature sort of conflate altruism with morality. They'll use it to mean the same thing. And I can't say they're wrong. You could just operationalize, well, by moral, I mean altruistic. And then, or I mean cooperative. So, okay, are the animals cooperative? Then they're moral. So as long as you stipulate your terms carefully, that's fine. And I don't think there's any essence to the true meaning of morality. So what's my objection to that? I don't really have anyone. There'd just be practical questions about what kind of language we should use, not like which use of terminology is correct. Okay. So I'm at almost 2 hours. So yeah, let's see. I'll get through these comments. Then I'll make some closing remarks. I'll finish because I didn't continue with the video. Let's see where we're at. I'm about halfway through. So then I'll try to do a round 2, but I'll see if there's other things I have to do today. Okay. Someone says, do you need God for morality? No, I don't think you do. Sapir says, well, trolls and spammers are annoying. It's part of a milestone for a streamer. I think that that's true. And then he says, you could be a moral realist. They exist in every sense and not attribute that to God. Yeah, okay, true. People commenting on animals and morality. So Ismail says, I heard you say a couple times that you choose to say murder is wrong because anti-realist language scares people. Why care about emotional baggage or words when searching for truth? Okay, so a few things. I don't know if I've said that before. I don't say murder is wrong because anti-realist language scares people. I don't think there's any inconsistency with anti-realism and saying murder is wrong in the first place. Like, I don't think realists have a monopoly on ordinary moral discourse or on normative language more generally. So I just don't think there's an inconsistency in the first place. But even if I did, I'm not just concerned with like truth. If you want to make a distinction between truth and practical considerations, I'm not even sure that I would. But you know, would I want to go around using certain kinds of language if it caused immense suffering or caused people to have horrible views? No, probably not. Like, I don't want people to suffer. If we have to restructure how we speak about things to avoid societal collapse or something, then why wouldn't we want to do that? Especially if it doesn't compromise, the quote unquote truth. So there is more to life, I think, even if you're a philosopher, than just having true beliefs, is having useful beliefs. And so for me, the distinction collapses. But even if it doesn't for you, like, I care about more stuff than just like being quote unquote correct. I care about like life going well. Oh, okay. I see. You said, I paraphrased it not because of bad intentions, but I can't remember exact words. That's fair. That's fair. It's hard to get people's exact words. So yeah. I care about practical considerations as ends in themselves. Like, I just don't want bad stuff to happen. And that there's going to be trade-offs between speaking in a way that you think is technically accurate and speaking in a way that might confuse or mislead or people or make them do bad things. Or like, well, not make, but like tend to cause people to do worse things. Okay, so there's people, I guess so we're not going to continue the video for now. I'll continue it in another video and we'll just get through all the stuff people are saying. Because I guess there's like, I don't know, administrative stuff to do. Let's talk about it. Sapir says, if there's nothing stands independently wrong with advertising your Patreon, then you can't think there's anything wrong with it at all. Yeah, true. I guess I have to say, go sign up on Patreon. Yeah, the thing with that is I haven't added like cool, like right now it's very bare bones, and I want to eventually add stuff to that, and I will. So I do have a prototype of a Lance Independent t-shirt. Where is that? I don't think I have it out, but I'll show it. I do have photos of me wearing it, but I have a prototype of a t-shirt, so I might eventually have like mugs and stuff like that. But see that, how do you, that feels so awful, like to sell it. But I really like my logo. Like you can see it in the top, over there, that in the corner. I really like it. So I had someone make that for me, and it just, I thought it turned out really great. I think it's cool looking, so I'm very happy with it. Anyway, Ben Roberts says, my recommendation, turn things like charity, be transparent with your revenue and expenses, keep you honest, and convinces you the funding is important. Yeah, that seems right. That seems like the right way to go. People talking about the Maureen argument in the comments. I'm not going to get into that now. What is this about? Remember arbitrary Kyle. What is that? Yeah, Truth Over Tea says arbitrariness affects both sides to me, and I think that that's true. All right, I'm trying to wrap up here. And then it's lunchtime. It's already 3 where I'm at, so it's definitely like way too late. Okay, people are being very, very nice and here. It's I appreciate it. So choose a desk, put the price in, and we'll happily crowdfund it. So the issue is that I have other priorities that I have to deal with. So that's why I haven't been, funding this. If I got some special grant that's like the money is dedicated specifically to setting up the channel and improving things, then I would do that. Like maybe I could get a green screen or buy some LEDs, or I don't know. I don't have anywhere in the house that I could easily go other than this room. So it's a little hard to change the location of my stupid closets. So there's not a whole lot I can do at the moment. Okay. I think I know. That's the Kyle. That's the, yeah. Okay. I know who you're talking about. Yeah. So Nidhi says you can apply for monetization. Maybe your watch hours need to go up. The watch hours, I got some emails saying that I can apply early or something. So I think I'll probably go ahead and do that. But I don't imagine that I'm going to get much money from this channel right now, at least. Yeah, a couple bucks. Yeah, it'll get me a couple bucks. That's not going to get a new camera or anything like that. But hey, you got to start somewhere. But that's why really the content of the channel has to change, not being just meta ethics, because that's just not ever going to get me a million people watching. Okay, so I think I will start to wrap things up there. I'll try to return, if not today, then maybe tomorrow or the day after for part 2. But I definitely need to go take a break now. All right, so any last remarks from everybody? You got a few seconds to get them in. I will wait for a couple seconds. Not seeing anything. All right, so thanks everybody. I will take care. Take care. I will head out for lunch. I can't even speak anymore. So I'm going to have to go take care of lunch and all that stuff. Thanks everybody for being here. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, share the video around, tell people about it, join my Discord if you want. You go follow me on TikTok. Go check out Patreon if you really want to. Not necessary, but I'm certainly not going to say no. All the things. And go check out the video that I reviewed. And if you do, you don't just have to leave a comment on this video. You can leave a comment on that video. We can engage over on their channel. If you do that, please be respectful and nice. I do not like it when people are nasty in YouTube comments. So please be respectful and nice if you engage with any videos that I review and critique. Okay? All right. Take care, everybody. See y'all later.